Frontline? How are you guys? Yeah? Good? We all can be a group of people not on spring break together, okay? Sound good? Is that cool? First service, everybody was like super depressed. So we don't have to be depressed here, right? Right. Perfect. We were unified as we build snowmans. Snowmans? I'm just going to shut up and say what I prepared. So, I want to start out by asking a question. And it's not a trick question, it's not a hard question, or anything along those lines. This is the question I want to ask it, and then we're going to have a moment of awkward silence, where we're just quiet. And so this is the question that to reflect on. Why do you love Jesus? Why do you love Jesus? For those of you who call yourself a follower of Jesus in here, why do you love Jesus? The awkward silence starts now. One of the things that I found about a question like that is that people's minds could go in 100 different ways. So you might not be thinking what I'm thinking, you guys might not be thinking what they're thinking, but I have found, though, that there is a common thread with this question and how people answer. There's a common thread, and usually when you ask somebody that question, why do you love Jesus, you can follow it up with another question, and the other question is, what was their name? Usually you can follow it up with that question. What was their name? What was their name? Who was this? So maybe you weren't thinking about a name. Maybe you were definitely thinking about a name. So here's what I want to do. I want this to be interactive real quick at the beginning here. And I want to ask, and you guys shout it out in a second. I want to know, what was the person's name? And then what was their relationship to you? Please do not give the whole backstory on your relationship with them. We ain't got time for that. But I want to hear name and relationship. So loudly say it, loud enough so I can hear. It's a big room. Name and relationship, go. Mary Ann, say the relationship.
Mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law. What else?
Jim, father.
Jim, father.
Randy, friend.
Okay, hold on. Randy, friend?
Yeah.
Who else?
Dexter, son.
Baxter, son?
Dexter.
Dexter. Very cool. Who else? Huh?
Winifred, Wood, my mother.
Very cool. Awesome mother. All right, who else? Winifred's a great name, by the way. Anybody a Winifred in here? We had a Mildred last service. That was a good one, too. Who else?
Noreen, grandma.
Noreen, grandma?
Helen Marshall.
Hallie?
Grandma.
Grandma?
Jerry, grandma.
Jerry, grandma. Lots of grandmas. One more.
Skeeter.
What?
Skeeter.
Skeeter? Love that. How much relationship?
Grandmother.
Grandmother. That's so cool. Skeeter. That beats Mildred from last service, all right? Winifred, Skeeter, those are the winners today. You know what's interesting about that is, you could have gone on for a while. I shut that down. Because what I'm guessing is that every single person who calls themselves a follower of Jesus in here probably has a name. Maybe you've got multiple names and you had to decide, well, who am I going to say if I say it out loud? And the reason why I would say that this happens is because, we want to put that slide up, programs seldom change people, but people often change people. Are you with me on this? Programs seldom change people, people often change people. The difficulty, however, is that being involved in a program is way easier than being in relationships with people, is it not? Way easier. And so it's much easier to come to a church service and remain anonymous and leave than it is to build a relationship with somebody and try to leave that deep relationship. But sometimes, here's what makes it very difficult, is that relationships are super duper messy, are they not? Very messy. And in a lot of ways, a program where you're anonymous, you don't have to experience the messiness of it, because you come and you leave. But what I'm guessing is that those of us in here who call ourselves followers of Jesus, those of you who have a deep relationship with Jesus, my guess is that you have a person deeply rooted in your mind, in your soul, that you know this is the person, these are the people, because programs seldom change people, and people often change people. Some of you may know that I am connected. I've worked here for years. I've worked here for just right around 8 years or so. This is my 8th year anyway. And I love this place, so connected, invested here. But I also work for an organization out of Los Angeles, or out of Pasadena, called the Fuller Youth Institute, and it's out of Fuller Theological Seminary, which is the largest seminary in the world. And so I speak for them, and I write for them, I travel for them, and I work with them on a particular research project. I was just out there a few months ago. We started a new brand new research project, but what they do is they conduct research, like very, very well done, huge project type of research, like millions of dollars of endowments and grants from the Lilly Endowment. And they conduct these projects, and then after they're done with these research projects, they leverage that research into resources for the church. And so if you've ever heard, if you go to a bookstore, any bookstore, if you go to a Christian bookstore, Barnes & Noble, whatever, you may have seen a book called Sticky Faith. And so Sticky Faith is the organization, or is the book that comes from the research project that I've been very involved in for the last like 5 or 6 years or so. It's sold like hundreds of thousands of copies. It's done really, really well, which is very cool because it's such good information. And here's what we did. We did this study, the Sticky Faith study. It's actually called the College Transition Project. Is a study that was done, largest study ever researched on high school seniors who are directly connected in youth groups at churches. So these are kids who call themselves followers of Jesus. And what we did was we watched their last year of high school, and then then 3 years, and in a lot of cases, 4 years of college. We just watched what happens with faith after you graduate and you go to college. And we found a ton of different things, and what I think we were open to find is that we could find like a silver bullet. Like if you do this practice, then you get this result. But like obviously you can't find something. If you do this, then 100% of the time this is going to happen. So we didn't find a silver bullet, but we kind of jokingly say we found some silver shavings. We found some very hopeful things that we believe are very helpful in understanding what it means for kids to have a faith that lasts. And if you were to ask me, if you were to ask any of the other researchers, what was the most predominant thing you found in your study for kids who had a sticky faith or a faith that sticks, the most prominent thing that we found in our study was that kids who had intergenerational relationships tended to fare better in their faith than kids who didn't have intergenerational relationships. It's very interesting. It's probably the #1 predictor that we found in our study on faith that lasts among kids. In 2008, there was a study done by Lifeway Research. It's getting a little old now, but what they actually found, which is really interesting, is it's not even just about intergenerational relationships, it's the actual number of intergenerational relationships that a kid would have. So they found that kids who had 5 or more deep intergenerational relationships growing up tended to fare better in their faith than kids who had 4 or less. But the number 5 actually seemed to be a big pivot point or a fulcrum for their research study. And actually, if a kid had 5 intergenerational relationships, went up by 22% their probability that they might have a faith that lasts. Super interesting stuff. Well, the reason why I think that this is important is because if relationships are so difficult sometimes, how can we, in a healthy way, foster these intergenerational relationships that seem to be a predictor for a faith that sticks or a faith that lasts forever? And one of the things that's complicated is that when I say like we're going to talk about mentoring today or relationships with people, it's not like the sexiest topic ever, is it? Right? People were going, oh, I can't wait to come to church and listen about mentoring. No, we came up with a series before Easter called I've Got Baggage, and it was the kind of series where everybody was talking about it because we've all got baggage, and we all want to just kind of get that out. And this is like, well, I guess a mentor is kind of important. It's not like the most exhilarating topic ever to talk about, but if these deep relationships seem to be a predictor for a faith that lasts forever, we've got to talk about it. And it's not something that's just cool that we kind of made up, that we think, hey, this is some great idea, and we want to do this, and we've just kind of processed on our own. Like, this is deeply biblical, intrinsic to the Bible, all thousands and thousands of years ago, long before Jesus and including Jesus, intergenerational relationships existed. There's this passage from Luke 2. We're going to look at this story, and then afterwards we're going to look at another story. But in Luke 2, there's this fascinating story that takes place in verses 41 to 52. And this is a portion of it. It says, every year Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When Jesus, was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. So watch that. According to the custom, it was normal for 12-year-olds to go to this Passover festival. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, don't miss this, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Does anybody else find that hilarious? Like, somebody please call CPS on Mary and Joseph now. This is serious parental neglect going on, okay? You had one job, take care of the Son of God, and you couldn't do it. And hey, I'm going to entrust you with the Messiah. Be really careful, he's the Savior of the world. Can you imagine their panic of like, oh, we don't have Jesus, right? So it's hilarious. So thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. And then when they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. So that's like 1 day out, 1 day back. And then it says after 3 days. So let's look at this. Maybe it's 2 days total of travel, and then it's maybe it's 3 more days. That's 5 days total. Maybe it's a total of 3 days. So either way, Jesus is missing from them for 3 to 5 days. After 3 days, they found him. Watch where they found him. In the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. I find this story fascinating because Jesus is not with Mary and Joseph for 3 to 5 days. And where they find Jesus is in the temple courts asking questions to the teachers of the law. They don't find Jesus like off with a bunch of kids his own age. He didn't go to the youth room to have a pizza party and play Xbox. Like, deeply intrinsic to the culture of the temple was kids and adults interacting with each other, engaging with each other. And I guess when I read this, I was thinking to myself, well, maybe they thought it was Jesus or something like that. It was like the Messiah. Maybe they wanted to talk to him. No, he's 12 years old. They have no idea. Which makes it even more powerful because it just means that part of their culture, part of the context is that they would just be in relationship with each other. This is fascinating that Jesus himself had these types of deep relationships or learning from each other what it means what it means to learn about God, those kinds of things. And they're learning from him, he's learning from them. There's this back and forth that's actually happening there. When I do these seminars, right, when I talk about this, I will almost inevitably get asked a question that somebody will say, well, why do you call it intergenerational ministry? Why don't you call it multi-generational ministry? And it sounds probably like a really random question, but I actually think it is important. And there's a slight nuance as to why I would say it's intergenerational and not multi-generational. And this is the way I describe it. Is I would say multi-generational ministry is like the repeat button on iTunes. It's like the repeat button on iTunes. It's like you've got arrows going around each other, but they're not intersecting with each other. Multi-generational ministry is like when you have kids and adults in the same room, but they leave the room before you know more about a different generation than when you walked in the door. There is a time and a place for multi-generational ministry to happen. It's not a bad thing, but I'll talk to a lot of churches and they'll say, a lot of leaders, a lot of pastors who are sorting through this kind of stuff, and they'll say, well, yeah, we do intergenerational services, and then what I find out is what they're doing is they just got a bunch of adults and kids in the room, but they're not engaging with each other, learning from each other. It's the term that I've used is repeat button ministry. And there's a place for that, that's fine. But I would say intergenerational ministry is like the shuffle button on iTunes. That there's an actual intersecting of generations that's taking place. That you know more about a generation, a different generation, than when you walked in the door. You have a deeper relationship with somebody than when you walked in the door. And so you are leaving knowing more about different generations, growing closer in your faith, those types of things. This is like the shuffle button on iTunes. There's intergenerational ministry is like the 16-year-old who goes up to the senior citizen or the older adult and says, hi, my name is so-and-so. I heard your spouse just passed away. How can I pray for you? Intergenerational ministry is when that older adult or senior citizen goes to the 16-year-old kid and says, hi, my name is so-and-so. How can I pray for you as you go through school? How can I mentor you? How can I help you in life? How can I help you learn about Jesus? Intergenerational ministry is when the middle-aged person is serving in student ministry at our NowGen, our student ministry, or the Block, our children's ministry, and they're growing in deep relationship, and maybe that small group leader in student ministry goes to their kids' sporting event, and they start building a relationship with them there. Intergenerational ministry is an intersecting of generations. And what you see Jesus doing is Jesus, in this case anyway, is being intergenerational, shuffle button ministry, and not multi-generational repeat button. They are interacting with each other. Now, the other thing that I get when I start talking about this is I get people who say, well, if intergenerational relationships or intergenerational worship is like a predictor of faith retention, then why do we still have age-appropriate ministries? Like, why do we have that? Why don't we just have all kids in worship services? And so, what I would say is this, and this is the bulletin, is that we still believe in age-appropriate ministries, but with intergenerational opportunities. For anybody who understands child and adolescent development, you understand that kids, students, children, adolescents, they develop differently than adults, or they're at a different stage developmentally than adults. Our 5-year-old son, Isaiah, does not want to come in here and listen to his daddy preach a 35-minute sermon. That would be super boring for him, right? Some of you adults are bored listening to this 35-minute sermon. And that's okay. Sometimes I get bored listening to myself, so that's cool. But he's going to want to learn in a different type of way, in an age-appropriate environment, and that's totally fine. So we're not calling for the end of children's ministry or the end of student ministry. We're saying, let them learn in an age-appropriate way, but let's offer them intergenerational opportunities. Let's give them ways where they can learn and interact and engage with people of a different generation and learn from each other in their same generation as well. What I've found is that when churches really focus on intergenerational ministry, shuffle button type of ministry, it requires deep intentionality. You don't just slip into deep relationships with people. You have to be very intentional about it. And I would argue that one of the most important things that you can do for your entire life is put yourself in a position where you are going to learn about Jesus. I would also argue that for you, if you are parents in here, that the most important thing you can do for your kids is put them in a position where they are going to learn of what it means to follow Jesus and what it means to love Jesus. I would say I don't know something that is more important than that. To intentionally, deeply put yourselves in engaged relationships with others. And there's this story from the Bible, and it's from 1 Samuel, and we try to keep as many notes as we can so we know when we preached on passages and stuff. And I knew I had preached on this passage here at Frontline before, and I went back in the notes. It was right around 2 years ago that I preached on this passage. And so decided, well, do I want to talk about this? Do I want to bring in something else? And I thought, no, I want to talk about this passage again and draw the same thought out of it because I think it's important. And so if you were here, Hannah is barren. Hannah's infertile. She can't have her own children. And this has been going on for years and years and years. She's mocked. She's chastised for it. People make fun of her for it. She's got all of these enemies who have been built up because she can't have her own kids. And so there's one point in the story where we'll pick up. She is just praying to God. God, would you just remember me and give me a child? And so this is where it picks up. It says, and she made a vow saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. She's setting something up for him all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. Well, out of context, that last sentence is bizarre, right? No razor will ever be used on his head. What does that mean? Well, the reason why this is important is because back in that day, there was a vow that people could make to follow God called the Nazirite vow. And the Nazirite vow included, it was a 7-year period where for 7 years you would not cut your hair. So you wouldn't put a razor to your head, you wouldn't cut your hair. So you could actually see people who hadn't cut their hair for a very long time and think, oh, they very well could be doing a Nazirite vow. And this was a big deal. It was one of the hardest things that you'd have to do. Back then, one of the other rules or parts of the vow is that you couldn't touch people who had been deceased. Well, today that's kind of weird, but back then you'd have to prepare bodies. You didn't have people to come in and help take care of things, so you couldn't do that because the body would be considered unclean, and you were, as a Nazirite vow, or as a Nazirite, trying to really think, I want to be intentional about this. And so you have all of these different rules that you would have to follow. And so what Hannah, or what she's praying here is, hey, listen, God, if you would just give me a child, I would give him over to you all the days of his life, forever, and no razor will ever be used on his head. Not a period of 7 years, but forever. And so this is a few verses later what follows up. So it's early the next morning they arose and worshipped the Lord before the Lord, and then back to their home at Ramah. Elkanah made love to his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She finally got her child. She named him Samuel, saying, because I asked the Lord for him. And so she said to her husband, this is where it gets really interesting. After the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always. Do what seems best to you, her husband Elkanah told her. No, Hannah, don't do that. You just got your child. You just had your baby. Elkanah, what are you guys thinking? And so she's saying, I want to put my child in a position where he will live for the Lord all of the days of his life, and he's going to live there. Well, what is there? It's the temple. She wants him to live at the temple. And so this is what happens a little bit later. So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. After he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was. 3 verses later, they brought the boy to Eli, and Eli is the priest at the temple. He's like a big dog. He's the big shot. And so she wants to place him in Eli's care, and she said to him, pardon me, my Lord. As surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life, he will be given over to the Lord. And I love this last sentence. And he, Samuel, worshipped the Lord there. There's this fascinating story of this woman who can't have a baby, and then she finally has her child. And what does she do? She intentionally puts him in a position to learn from somebody, Eli, this priest from a different generation. She puts him in this position so he will grow in the ways of God. So he'll grow in the presence of God. And she thinks to herself, the most important thing I can do for my son, for Samuel, is for him to be raised with Eli in the temple. And what we see later is that Samuel becomes a priest. And Brian next week is going to talk about the second part of this story and kind of what happens, because it's fascinating. But she knows that the most important thing that she can do for Samuel, in this case, is to surround him with the best possible way for him to grow in the ways of God. Are you putting your kids in the best possible way for them to grow, surrounding them with the right people? Are you personally setting up your life in such a way where it is the most intentional opportunity for you to grow in the ways of God? I would argue, and I don't know that there's another thing more important in our lives than to do this. I would say this way, that creating intentional ways for you or your family to grow spiritually is critical for spiritual formation. And I would argue to you that it happens in the context of relationships with people and not necessarily programs. And so what we've done is we've got these 4 chairs. These 4 chairs are kind of like a visual of different generations that are represented. You've got a high chair, which represents children or babies. You've got a desk, which represents students. I don't know why I chose a recliner, but a recliner to me seems like the kind of chair that a middle-aged man would have when he wants to just kick back and watch sports. Are you with me on this? Like, it reminds me of like a dad chair. Whose dad had a dad chair growing up? You don't sit in dad's chair, right? It's dad's chair, not my chair. Right? So my dad had a dad chair. It scared me to ever sit in it. And so then you've got a rocker here. And my grandmother, who's still alive, when I was growing up, she had a rocker much like this one. And so this rocker reminds me of my grandmother. Beulah Wilhelmina Anderson is her name. Wilhelmina, isn't that awesome? Apparently not, so that's cool. Whatever. I'm gonna put Beulah on you. And, anyway, yeah, my nanny, she sat in a rocker like this. And so these 4 generations, these 4 chairs represent different generations. And I would ask this question. If you want to put the next slide up. What if each of us had one person in each chair that we were in deep relationship with? What if each of us had one person in each chair that we could grow together with? And so I just turned 34 a few weeks ago, and so I'm going to put myself in the middle-aged chair here. What if I were to have somebody who, from a student or a child or an older adult that I could spend time influencing? Or maybe, what if I had an older adult, a student, or a child that I learned what it means to follow Jesus from? Because part of the way I've defined intergenerational ministry is that intergenerational ministry happens when an 8-year-old can teach an 18-year-old who can teach an 80-year-old about Jesus, and an 80-year-old can teach an 18-year-old who can teach an 8-year-old about Jesus. That we can follow Jesus and we can learn what it means to follow Jesus from people no matter where we are in the age spectrum. And it all happens in different ways. For somebody who's older, it might be through a sermon, or it might be through leading a small group, and that's how you teach younger people. It might be through that context. But for younger people, I've often found that it's through their innocent whimsy, their innocent whimsical faith, that they have this faith that it's just there and they just believe. And I'll say this lightly and lovingly about older, maybe people my age, is that people who are younger they haven't had relationships go bad and where they become jaded and cynical, right? For me, I've had relationships go bad, so I become jaded and cynical. I lose my faith sometimes, but kids just believe. And there's this unbelievable thing you can learn about what it means to follow God because they just believe. And so we can learn about what it means to follow Jesus no matter where we are on the age spectrum. There's this concept in sticky faith, and we have talked about this here, and it's called the 5-to-1 ratio. And so this might be familiar to you. And the 5-to-1 ratio is really, really important. This guy, Chuck Clark, coined this phrase, and he said, well, we always have these ratios in education or in churches or whatever, and what it is it's for every 5 kids, there's 1 adult, or every 7 kids, if you did 7-to-1, there'd be 1 adult who takes care of them, who's intentional with them, in that field trip or in that classroom setting or whatever. Well, he says, what would happen if we flipped that? We had a new 5-to-1 ratio, and it wasn't for every 5 kids there's 1 adult, but what if it was 5 adults for every 1 kid? That it was 5 intentional relationships for every 1 child. What would happen to your children if you started having intentional relationships surrounding them? 5 of them. Maybe 5 is daunting. Maybe it's 2. Maybe it's 3. Maybe it builds its way up to 5. But you've got a couple people who will surround your child and start raising them in the ways of God, teaching them what it means to follow Jesus. My wife and I have taken this concept very, very seriously with our kids. And my wife, in her Pinterest brilliance. I don't know. Thought of these things called prayer sticks. And what she decided to do is she went on Facebook and she got pictures of the most important people in our lives. There's over 40 pictures in here of people. And she got the pictures printed, and then she awkwardly cut out their heads and glued them on a tongue depressor stick. It's random. And she said, hey, what would happen if when we did this with Isaiah, our son, when he was 2, so this was 3 years ago. What would happen if every single night when we're putting him to bed, we each pull a couple prayer sticks and we pray for the people who are most important in our lives, the most significant people in our lives. So this is Sam. This is Brad, the youth pastor who was just up here. This is Sam, his wife. This is her. This is Kevin. This is my brother-in-law. This is my wife's brother. This is DJ. This is my brother's son. And so we've got a ton of different people. We've got kids in here, we've got people our age in here, we've got grandparents here, we've got older adults in here, but we've got who we think are the most important people in our lives. So we started praying for them, and here's what the brilliance of it was, is that Isaiah started to begin to understand that these people were the most important people in mommy and daddy's life. And as a result, they became the most important people in his life. He started beginning to say, oh, well, I pray for them regularly. I know what's going on with them, and they are interacting with me. Who are the people who you can go on Facebook and you can print their picture and cut out their heads and put them on tongue depressor sticks? Who are those people for you? Who are the people who you can build prayer sticks for, and you can begin to pray for them every week, and your kids can begin to learn what it means to follow Jesus through them and their influence. I wrote down a list. Maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's a kid's classroom teacher, friends, it's family, it's an old mentor of yours, maybe it's a small group leader, maybe it's a coach. Who are those people for you that you can intentionally make be really important, from the youngest people all the way through the oldest people, older adults, senior citizens? And if I could be honest with you about something, we feel like in the last year or so, this has been a very confessional time for Frontline, where we've just kind of confessed some stuff that we've kind of maybe done wrong, or we haven't done as well as we could. And Brian and I were just talking about this a few weeks ago, and we talked about it quite a bit, is that we've said, we're a church of young families. We're not like a church with young families, we're a church of young families. That demographically, we have more young families than anybody else here. And I think what has happened because of that is that for the people who are older adults in here, for the senior citizens in here, I don't know that we have given you a place where you feel like you have a place at the table, where you feel like this is my church, this is where I go home, and I can significantly impact people here, and I don't have to be in a young family to do that. And I don't know that we've done that well. And if you felt that way, if you would please just accept our apology, if we could ask for forgiveness there and say, no, you definitely have a seat at the table. That rocker, that glider chair is just as important as these seats here. We have a young church, we're only 16 years old, and so from a maturity perspective, we have to have you as older adults. We have to have you as senior citizens. We believe that you have a place here, and we're asking, would you please find your place and jump in and know that you are welcome? That's what we're hoping for. And this whole idea of senior adults, or older adults, senior citizens, has been really important for me personally. I'm finishing up my master's. I've just got a couple classes left, and then I finish up my capstone project or my master's thesis. And so I started working on my master's thesis about a year ago. So I've been working in April of last year, and then I finish in October. So it'll be about a year and a half total that I've been working on this project. So about a year ago, I started this project, and this research project, and it's never, as far as I know, a study like this has never been done before. But what I'm looking at specifically is how grandparents shape the faith formation of their grandkids, and whether or not proximity matters in that faith formation. There's been a lot of studies that have been done on grandparents and faith formation. I'm specifically looking at, do grandparents need to be close? Like, do they need to live in the same area? Do they need to be around each other on a regular basis or on a daily basis or a weekly basis? Or do things like like technology helping, Skype or FaceTime or Boo, which is like a group Skype thing, things like social media, like Facebook or Twitter or even email or something like that, does that help as we shape the faith formation of our grandkids? And what I'm finding in this study is that the opportunity for grandparents to shape the faith formation of grandkids is absolutely ridiculously huge. If you think about the names that were mentioned, it does not surprise me at all that the relationship to you were grandparents. Grandparents have an opportunity to shape faith formation in incredible ways. And so this brings us to one point here, which is that we have been recently having conversations and talking, and we collected a huge group of names of like 60 people, and we asked a big group of people, would you be willing to come to a lunch so that we could talk about something? It was kind of cryptic. We didn't tell each other, we didn't tell many people what it was about, but we said, would you be willing to do this? And so a couple weeks ago, Palm Sunday weekend, we met a couple of staff members and started talking to some people who we would say, hey, we believe that you have incredible spiritual, or you have an opportunity to teach people or mentor people spiritually. Would you be willing to do that? And so we're really excited to say that it's not quite launched yet, but it's going to be, but we are well on our way to launching something that we're calling the Mentoring Initiative. And what it is it's a group of people who say, I am going to passionately pursue of teaching people what it means to follow Jesus. And so what we've done is we've got a bunch of people who are already on board with doing this, and people who are willing to be mentors, and we want people who are willing to have mentors. So we launched this, this went live yesterday, and it's called Frontline GR. The link is frontlinegr.com/mentor. And so the link is live, but the initiative hasn't actually started yet, but it will start soon. And what we want is this. We want you today to go to frontlinegr.com/mentor. And you have an opportunity to click on one of two buttons. One button says, I want to be a mentor, because we need mentors for this. And the other button says, I would like to have a mentor. Maybe you're in a situation where it's both. Maybe you want to mentor somebody, but you also want to be mentored. That's awesome. That's awesome. Fill out both. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to collect names because we need people who are willing to be mentors, who are willing to say, I want to invest in somebody else's life. And we also want people to say, I really need to be invested in. I need to make people this priority in my spiritual development. And so what we're asking for you to do is, would you prayerfully consider going to frontlinegr.com/mentor and either being a mentor or signing up to be mentored? Would you prayerfully consider that? Because we think that if we can figure this mentoring initiative out, this could be an absolute game changer for us here at Frontline. We think this could absolutely revolutionize the spiritual development of people here at this church. My dad is he is probably my hero. I know people use that term in a cliche kind of way or whatever. I've had a very close relationship with my dad, particularly in the last 15 years or so since I've been a Christian. But I was raised Catholic, and I don't know about you guys, maybe some of you are raised Catholic, maybe some of you are Catholic in here, and you're just here for the weekend. But I was raised Catholic, and I didn't have necessarily like a bad experience in the Catholic Church. I just, at least for me personally, didn't have much of an experience in the Catholic Church. And my dad really wanted to hold on to those Catholic roots, but for him, again, this doesn't happen for everybody. For my dad, he just never made this idea of Jesus the most central idea in his life. He never made Jesus the most important person in his life. But it was still kind of there. And so when I became a Christian, I remember us having some really awkward conversations where I realized this relationship with Jesus is this thing that matters to me. And my dad and I kind of chatted a little bit, but it was kind of awkward. And I went off to school and to be a pastor and everything. And the relationship, we never really talked about Jesus very much. And then about 5 years ago, my dad and my mom got plugged into a local church. Or it's called Holton Wesleyan Church in Holton, Maine. It's a little kind of country church. And so my mom and dad started going to this, and my dad kind of attended, but it was really in a lot of ways like him attending. He was kind of anonymous. So he'd kind of go, and he wasn't really plugged in at all. And then about 2 years ago, I got a call from my dad, and my dad says, hey, Pastor Mel, which is their senior citizen pastor. My dad became a senior citizen a couple years ago, technically. Pastor Mel asked if I'd be willing to go out for coffee with him. I was like, oh, that's awesome. What'd you say? And he goes, well, I kind of reluctantly said yes, but why do you think he wants to meet with me? Well, I don't know. Maybe he just wants to get to know you more and hear your story. And he's like, well, yeah, but is he going to like rope me into doing a bunch of things? And I remember thinking to myself, is this what people think when I call them to want to go out for coffee? Is this what they actually think? Because that's not the intention. And so my dad was like, well, why do you think he wants to do it? I'm like, I don't know, Dad, just go out for coffee with him. And so my dad goes out for coffee, that week with Pastor Mel. And so I called that afternoon because I knew that morning he was going out for coffee. And hey, how did it go? And my dad so excitedly said, oh, he said it was incredible. We met for like 2.5 hours over coffee. Well, did he try to rope you into doing anything? No. He just wanted to get to know me. I was like, Dad, that's awesome. So where'd things land? And he goes, we're going to do it again next week. That's awesome. And he goes, well, why do you think he wants to be with me next week? Like, Dad, are you kidding me? Go meet with him next week. And so my dad meets with him next week. And then he meets with Pastor Mel again the next week, and the next week, and the next week, and the next week. You can see where this is going, right? He starts meeting with him on a very regular basis. And then there was a period of time where my dad calls and says, hey, I just this weekend got signed up for a men's Sunday school. They do like an old school Sunday school at their church. I got signed up for this Sunday school. And guess who's the teacher? Pastor Mel is the teacher. And so he jumps into this Sunday school and he gets involved. And I would say at that time, or around this time with Pastor Mel, and especially with this group, that the conversations that my dad and I had started having that centered almost entirely around Jesus when we would talk, started rising and rising and rising and rising until the majority of our conversations then centered around Jesus. It was this remarkable thing where my dad just got involved and started taking this relationship with Jesus very seriously. Last week, I was just talking to my dad, and he has just finished up an 8-week Bible study where he met with 20 other men Tuesday mornings at 5:30 a.m. 5:30 in the morning. My dad, last week when he told me that it was ending, he said, man, I'm really going to miss these guys in this group. I said, Dad, of course you're going to miss the guys in the group, because programs seldom change people, but people often change people. My dad is being mentored, and he doesn't even know it. My dad is learning about what it means to follow Jesus because this man, Mel Norton, took interest in my dad and said, hey, I believe that you are not too old to get mentored. And my dad said, I don't believe I'm too old to get mentored. Will we be the kind of place where we say here at Frontline, we care more about people than we do programs? Will we be the kind of place where we say we care more about deep relationships and not just attending something? Will we be the kind of church where we say deep relationships are the things that matter and programs don't change people, but people change people? Will you be the kind of person like Mel Norton who takes deep interest in a person and says, I want to teach them what it means to follow Jesus? And will you be a person like Deprez who says, I don't care how old I am, it doesn't matter whether I'm young or to learn about what it means to follow Jesus? Would you prayerfully consider being a mentor or having a mentor moving forward as we launch this mentoring initiative? I would say it is one of the most important things you will ever do in your entire life. Let me offer a prayer, and then Brad's going to come up and close us out today. God, you are good, and you transform us. you deeply transform us. It's nothing that we do in the context of relationships, but it is what you do through relationships that transforms us. And so may we, God, be a church focused on mentoring and being mentored. God, may people not pray away their responsibility to act if God is calling them to be a mentor. May they not wait for a program like the Mentoring Initiative to start mentoring somebody who they already know they should be mentoring. God, may we not wait for the Mentoring Initiative to get started to actually get a mentor. May you put in people's minds somebody who they could ask so that they can start growing and learning about you, God. May we be a church, God, where relationships matter more than programs. God, we love you. And the only reason we love you is because you first loved us. So we pray these things in your Son, Jesus' name, and everybody said, Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Matthew. I was so excited when I saw he brought in the popsicle sticks because I knew Sam and I had pictures on them, but then he told me my head fell off mine, so that was kind of sad, you know. So, like I said earlier, as a staff and as a church, we have been so excited about the series. For the children's pastor, Lori and I, this is the stuff that energizes us and motivates us. This idea that deep relationships actually translates into meaningful, sustainable faith for people. And so we are so excited about where this series has taken us. We hope that you'll sign up for the Mentoring Initiative, and we hope you'll sign up in the lobby to grab one of these books. Again, they'll be available next week, but you can sign up today to have one ordered for you. And we'll be at the Orange Wall if you're new. We'd love to meet you out there. Otherwise, have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you guys next week.